Join the conversation.
Join the conversation.
You're with Cape Talk.
And it's time for the Naked Scientist. It's that huge appointment every Friday just after 9:30. An invitation for you to get your medical questions answered. Your questions about the cosmos, about Earth, about all of the very many living species out there. Any question that comes to mind, the question that keeps you out of sleep especially. We're going to go, well, firstly, we're going to welcome Dr. Chris Smith. It's great to have you back, Chris.
Good morning.
And Janus is champing at the bit for a piece of you. Janus, go ahead.
Hi, Chris. There are so many information. I don't know if it's false or rumors, whatever. But I heard that, for instance, our inner core, the solid core, slowing down and even changing direction. That our polarity is changing from south to north. How can it happen? And how it can affect us as well, because we're also producing our electromagnetic field. Our brain do this. And are we in the danger? Are we going to start walking on the head or walking backwards, or what's going on?
Goodness, I hope not. I mean, the bottom line here is that the Earth has been here for 4,500 million years, and it's been turning throughout that time, and it is slowing down a tiny bit, and that means the inside will be turning a bit slower too. Where's the energy gone? We're giving our energy to the moon. The moon is moving slightly farther away from us every day, and every year it adds up to a couple of centimetres that it's migrated farther from the planet, and that is reflected in the fact we have slightly lower tides, for example. But on the whole, the change is inconsequential, and the inner core in the middle of the planet, it's made up of molten iron. And this is spinning, as you correctly say, and through a mechanism that we don't completely understand, this mobile iron core generates a magnetic field. There must be some kind of distribution of charges which is creating a changing electric field, which is in some way creating a changing magnetic field, and that gives the Earth its magnetic field. But that spin is not fixed, and periodically it does change, and this has the effect of changing the Earth's magnetic field with it. How do we know that? Because about 50, 60, 70 years ago, scientists were mapping the seafloor of the oceans, and we know that the oceans are born at mid-ocean ridges, and that's where new seafloor is formed. And when the seafloor is formed, it inherits a pattern of the Earth's magnetic field at the time that seafloor was formed. So in other words, all the magnetically susceptible material in the new seafloor line up with where the Earth's magnetic field is pointing at that time. Now, because we know how fast seafloor is forming, if you map the field away from the mid-ocean ridge, you can see how the field has changed over time. And that reveals, exactly as people suspected, and from other samples, that the Earth's magnetic field has changed, moved around and flipped around many times over Earth's history, and roughly every 100,000 years, although more recently it's been nearly a million years since anything dramatic happened, it has completely inverted. Now, life has been present on the Earth for many millions of years, and therefore has crossed many of these transitions from north to south. And we're all still here. So the effects, whilst there will be some, and there will be consequences, the Earth's magnetic field protects us from radiation from space and helps animals navigate and so on, it's obviously not happening in such a way that it's rendering life impossible. So we can take some comfort from the fact that this has happened before and we are all still here.
So when the poles shift, does south become north and north become south?
The planet doesn't shift, but the magnetic poles do. So when I hold a compass up at the moment, the needle, which I call the north pointing needle, the north seeking needle, that's effectively the south pole of a magnet, and it's swinging round to find where the magnetic field of the planet's north pole is. So the magnet in my compass points to the magnetic north of the planet. Actually, that isn't the same as geographical north. If I draw the globe of the Earth and I look at where the planet's north pole is, that's not where the magnetic field is pointing to. That north magnetic pole wanders around all the time. When we get one of these flips, then in fact, if I held my compass up, it would point the other way, and the magnetic north pole would become the magnetic south pole, but the planet would sit there in space just as before.
Okay, that's maybe a problem for another day, but let's go to Pat in Randburg. Welcome, Pat.
Dr. Chris, if you have two trays of ice, the one tray is empty, the other one, some of the ice blocks have half melted. Now you fill them both up again, the one that had the ice that was half melted. It's easier to get those ice blocks out the next day than it is the one that was originally empty. Why is that?
Oh, right. I've never done the experiment. You'd have to be careful because, of course, we need to make sure we're comparing apples with apples, the same kinds of ice cube trays, etc. Why might this be? I can only think that if you've got half-filled ice cubes and then you make more ice cube on top, you've actually got less of the ice conforming to the surface contour of each of the little ice cube trays, so it's not plugging itself in quite so tightly, and therefore it's easier to dislodge because it's not the same shape exactly, and that makes it easier to pop it out. That would be my guesstimation, but otherwise I'd just be speculating.
Okay, now this one keeps Andre up at night. Naked Scientist, why do men always feel sleepy after sex? Why do they not want to talk after sex? What is happening in the brain?
I don't think it's just men. I think if you ask women, everyone says sex makes you sleepy. And it actually stands to reason why sex should make you sleepy. Because A, you're exerting yourself, but B, what do we do? What do we have sex for? Now, Richard Feynman, who got the Nobel Prize, he said science is like sex. They both have practical results, but that's not why we do them. The reason we have sex is for reproduction. That's Richard Feynman's practical results. How best to reproduce? You need what the man produces to stay in the right place in the lady for the right amount of time for it to get where it needs to go, which is into the fallopian tubes and find an egg that it can fertilise. Best way to make that happen, make sure that gravity doesn't exert its effects and make sure that you're rested so that everything can naturally happen while you're asleep. So it makes sense for someone to snuggle up and be in comfort after they've had sex because you're more likely to conceive. If you go running off and go and do other things, something else might go wrong. You might have an accident or something. So much more likely to conceive if you go to sleep after you've had sex. And that's why many people actually advocate, if you ever struggle sleeping, have sex. It's a great way to cure insomnia.
Andre. Yeah. Let's go to Graziella. Why do I get a painful sudden electric shock up my neck and head if I make a sudden move of head?
Right. Okay. There's a likely explanation to this, which is that if you think about your backbone, which has got your spinal cord running down a hole down the middle of it, coming out of your spinal cord are nerves that go to your tissues, motor nerves that supply your muscles, and sensory nerves that come in from your skin and muscles and feed into the spinal cord, bringing information from the outside world in. Now, one doctor put it to me that you can think of your spinal column, your backbone, as a bit like a bicycle chain held up by guy ropes. It's lots of bones all stacked one on top of the other, and they're all mobile. And when we make certain movements, they do slip and slide around a bit. And as we get older, they can slip and slide around a bit in the wrong direction. They can also build up bony prominences called osteophytes. So sometimes it's possible to make certain movements that mean the bones impinge on some of those nerves going out and coming into the spinal cord. And when you squeeze the nerves, they can fire off barrages of nerve information, which, as far as the spinal cord is concerned, is coming from the part of the body that nerve supplies. You get a referred sensation, effectively. So what's likely happening in this person is that when they make certain movements, sometimes they tweak a nerve that's coming out of their spinal cord through one of these bones in their backbone, and that tweak causes a barrage of pain information, and your spinal cord says, that's coming from this nerve which supplies this patch of my body, therefore that patch of my body must be sore. And you get that referred pain. That's the most likely explanation. There is a rare consequence of multiple sclerosis. I don't think this person's got that at all, but it's interesting to document this because Michael Crichton, who wrote Jurassic Park, as a medical student actually experienced this and writes about it in his autobiography. There's a phenomenon called Lhermitte's sign. And when you have inflammation in your spinal cord because of multiple sclerosis or a demyelinating condition, when you bend over and therefore stretch your spinal cord a bit, you end up with this sensation of electricity running up and down your back and your legs. And neurologists often ask people who might be having these symptoms about this. And that is a similar sort of phenomenon, but it's actually stretching the central nervous system rather than squeezing a peripheral nerve. But that's another reason why you might feel a sensation on a patch of skin when you make an abrupt movement.
It's a busy appointment with the Naked Scientist every Friday just after 9:30. Dr. Chris Smith, lecturer at Cambridge University, joins us and answers your question. Plenty of questions. And Alan called. I can tell you what Alan's asking. He wants to know if nicotine is addictive.
Alan, nicotine is one of the most addictive substances that we have documented. It targets a slightly different set of nerve pathways in the brain than other addictive substances like cocaine and heroin as its primary route of action on the nervous system, but ultimately harnesses the same pleasure centres that those other agents do. It's extremely and exquisitely addictive, and it is capable of producing physical sensations of addiction. So in other words, when you withdraw from it, you actually feel unwell and feel nervous or feel not quite right, and you put those sensations right by taking the drug, and you get relief from those side effects of withdrawal, which is the addictive tendency. And it's very easy to get hooked on nicotine. Most people agree. And most smokers, if you ask people who smoke, 75% of them say they would like to give up, and the vast majority who try fail about 75% of the time. Although Mark Twain, and I think also Ian Fleming, who wrote James Bond, I think they both sort of said, giving up smoking is really easy. I've done it hundreds of times.
Okay, let's go to Ernest. Ernest has sent us a voice note.
Why is it that sometimes your skin will just randomly start itching for no reason? You'd be walking and it will just itch. One. And two, why is it that after you scratch, there is this relief, almost this stimulating feeling of relief when you finally hit that scratch, that itch, I mean. Thank you, Ernest. Bye.
Hi, Ernest. Everyone can identify with the relief of a scratch applied to an itch. It's a bit like the relief you get after a sneeze, isn't it? When you desperately want to sneeze and then you do, and the feeling of relief and pleasure when you get to release that sneeze there are very few things that can compete with that. I do have a simple life, don't I? But why do we itch? Well, in the skin, we have arrays of nerve fibres that run all over the body surface, and different nerve fibres of different sizes and calibers signal different sorts of information. There are different grades of nerve that signal pain, some signal temperature, some signal light touch or brushing, tickling, and there's a specific population of nerve fibres that specifically convey itch sensation. And they run into the spinal cord. When they're active, they tell that bit of the spinal cord that the patch of the skin that they supply is itchy. That then induces you to pay attention to that patch of the skin, because if you think about it, when we itch, what's going on? There might be a parasite or something trying to burrow into you. There might be an insect trying to bite you. There might be a patch of your skin that's got damaged and it's healing up, and you need to be aware of that and draw attention to it so that you can look after it and get it better sooner. So what do? You reach for it and you scratch. When we scratch, we are applying a more vigorous stimulus to the skin that's sufficient to do harm. If you carried on scratching, you would eventually rub a hole in your skin. So you're potentially damaging your skin. It's a noxious stimulus. That recruits a different population or modality of nerve fibres, which are pain-sensing nerve fibres. They tell the corresponding patch of the spinal cord that sensation arising in this area hurts. They also send an inhibitory signal to the nerve fibres that convey itch. So when you itch, you scratch, the scratch turns off the itch, and you feel relief. And it's called the itch-scratch cycle, and dermatologists are very familiar with this because it's what underpins eczema. When you have inflammation in the skin because of an allergy, people go into this relentless itch-scratch cycle. They end up doing damage to their skin. That opens up the skin and more allergen goes in, makes the skin even more inflamed, which makes it more itchy, so they scratch even more, and before you know it, you've got really sore skin. So that's the basis of the itch-scratch cycle.
And then Ahmad, a question via WhatsApp. Why do humans have different blood types, and what's the purpose thereof?
Well, humans do, so do animals. I mean, sheep and dogs and foxes, they've all got many different blood groups. I think dogs might have 7 blood groups. But they're all sort of similar to the way ours work, but the blood groups are all different. A blood group is a sugar linked to a protein on the surface of our cells. So we have glycoproteins and sugars expressed on the surfaces of our cells like markers. They're like flags. Each country has its own flag. Different species have their particular flags. And different groups of people in the population have slightly different flags. It's a bit like in the UK, we've got a Scottish flag, an English flag, a Welsh flag, and there's even a Cornish flag. They're all one country, the United Kingdom, but bits of the country have their own flag. Well, in the human race, we have got 4 main blood groups that we talk about: Group O, Group A, Group B, and Group AB. And those groups all display different markers on their red blood cells, which can be recognised by the immune system and therefore regarded as foreign if you get the wrong blood transfusion. Now, animals are exactly the same, and in fact all the cells in our body display markers that say they're you, and your immune system is programmed to tell you from someone who's not you, which is why organ transplants have to be compatible. But that is the basis of blood groups, and all animals have them.
Geordie's got a question. Can a dream you have be a continuation of a previous night's dream? Kind of like a Saturday morning matinee serial which continues each week.
Hi, Geordie. I've had dreams where I've woken up and then wished I hadn't, because I really wanted to find out what would happen. And then you spend the next half hour trying to get back to sleep and get back into your dream. And sometimes you do a bit, but I've never really succeeded. The thing is, though, we don't really know why we dream. We don't really know why we sleep, but we know that both are essential, because if you don't have dream-based sleep, you don't feel well rested when you wake up. So it must be doing something, and it's something about the brain processing information. It's also doing important things to consolidate information that you've taken in during the day, consolidate memories. And also, it's often a reaction to experiences you've had, things you've been doing. Anyone who's going through exams knows that they often dream about exam papers. They'll dream about exam questions they can't do. Then they wake up in a panic and think, oh my goodness, oh no, I can do it. It's all right, it was just a dream. So, in other words, I think it's possible that you could end up with a sequential dream, because the dreams are driven by, and the subject matter of dreams is often driven by and influenced by your experiences. So if you kept on having certain experiences, you would keep on having certain types of dreams. And in fact, some people do. Some people who get particularly traumatized by things might have recurrent nightmares, for example, where they keep dreaming that something awful is going to happen because they think about that a lot during the day and they ruminate about it. So unsurprisingly, they don't get much relief when they go to sleep.
I think we're gonna end off with a medical question. I think a question that a lot of people are asking. Moira writes, please could you ask Dr. Chris about statins? There are so many conflicting opinions.
Well, statins are cholesterol-lowering drugs. They inhibit an enzyme called HMG-CoA reductase, which your body uses to make cholesterol. Because when you have high levels of cholesterol, and specifically one form of cholesterol called LDL, or low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, this is associated with forming plaques or build-ups in arteries. This is associated with those arteries becoming narrowed, stiffened, and potentially also forming blood clots or thrombi, which can clog the artery and then damage organs like your brain or your heart. So we know, given that high levels of cholesterol seem to make this more likely and lower levels of LDL cholesterol less likely, if we take a drug that reduces the level of LDL cholesterol, we should reduce our risk of arterial aging and the build-up of these fatty deposits. Statins do that job. They are one class of agent that can block that enzyme that makes cholesterol. If you reduce the rate at which your body makes cholesterol and you take in less saturated fat in your diet and less cholesterol in your diet, you will reduce your circulating cholesterol level, which will reduce your disease risk. Statins probably also do something to stabilise these deposits in your artery walls as well, making them less likely to rupture and block blood vessels. There are some reports of side effects from statins. The millions of people who are taking them around the world mean that this is an ongoing experiment, because they're a relatively recent class of drug. We've got decades of data rather than hundreds of years of data. So we're following this up to see. There are claims they can cause aches and pains, but that's actually been regressed or taken away, that claim, because people found that it was in fact a nocebo effect. People are told you get aches and pains if you take statins. So unsurprisingly, people report having aches and pains when they take statins. There doesn't seem to be any compelling evidence for that. They do affect the way in which cholesterol might be inserted into membranes in your brain, and that might affect memory. We don't know yet. Some people are still looking into that. And there are always idiosyncratic reactions with any drug. Any drug can do anything to anybody if you've got enough people taking enough drugs for long enough. So there are some very rare things as well. But on the whole, we think these are a very safe way to reduce cholesterol and reduce your risk, especially if you're at high risk, of having a heart attack or a stroke.
I think we can squeeze in another one. I don't think it's going to be a long answer. Ray wants to know if the dark side of the moon is ever visible to the naked eye.
The dark side of the moon is visible to the naked eye if you go round the back of the moon to take a look. As one NASA astronaut who flew round there during the Apollo landings saw. It was the first human to actually go round behind the moon and see it. Why is it called the dark side? Because it's dark in terms of our knowledge of it, because we never see it, because the moon always presents the same face to the Earth. The moon takes 28 days to go around the Earth. The moon takes 28 days to rotate on its own axis. So as it goes round, it's turning a bit at the same rate that it's going round the Earth. So it always shows us the same face. We never get to see the other side. But the other side, periodically, is facing the sun. And so it's going to be brightly lit. We just can't see it unless you fly around the back and have a look.
Yeah, such precision. Is that normal? Rotating over 28 days? And
yes,
keeping
it's
that
called
same
being
face?
tidally locked, and this is a common
Okay.
phenomenon. And in fact, Mercury, the closest planet into the sun, is also tidally locked, so it always presents the same face to the sun, and as a result has a scorching surface on one side and is a little bit cooler on the other side. But this is a common phenomenon, being tidally locked in that way.
Gotcha. The Naked Scientist every Friday after 9:30. Learn something with Dr. Chris Smith, of course, lecturer at Cambridge University. TheNakedScientist.com. Go and find him. There's a lot of questions there that he's answered in the past.